There are moments in life when a single sound can shatter years of doubt, when one note struck with trembling hands can silence an entire room and force everyone present to confront their own prejudices. This is the story of one such moment. The auditorium at Harrington Music Conservatory was filled with the kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive. 200 pairs of eyes fixed on a 17-year-old boy sitting before a grand piano, his dark hands hovering just above the ivory keys. The spotlight caught the sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead, illuminated the threadbare collar of his only dress shirt, revealed the slight tremor in his fingers. Just moments before, director Richard Ashford had looked at this boy with barely concealed contempt and declared loud enough for everyone to hear, "He'll never make it here." The words still hung in the air like poison. Other students had snickered, whispered behind manicured hands, exchanged knowing glances that said what they were all thinking. What was someone like him even doing here? The boy's name was Elijah Brooks, and he was partially deaf. In the front row, an elderly black woman sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Her eyes were fixed on her grandson, pride and fear warring in her expression. She had sold nearly everything she owned to get them to this audition. This was their one chance, their only chance. Elijah took a deep breath. His right ear, the one that had been damaged in the accident that killed his parents 12 years ago, heard nothing but a dull ringing. But his left ear, and more importantly, his heart, heard everything that mattered. His fingers descended toward the keys. But to understand this moment, to truly appreciate what was about to happen in that prestigious concert hall, we need to go back. Back to a small town in the American South, where a boy who the world had written off was about to prove that sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Ashford, Georgia, was the kind of town where everybody knew everybody, where gossip traveled faster than the internet, and where dreams were something that happened to other people in other places. Population 4,000, 2 stoplights, 1 high school, and not much hope for those who wanted more than what generations before them had settled for. Elijah Brooks had lived there his entire life, though he remembered very little of his first 5 years. Those memories had been erased, or perhaps mercifully hidden by the trauma of the accident. His parents, James and Angela Brooks, had been driving home from a church service on a rainy November evening when their car was struck head-on by a drunk driver. They died instantly. Elijah, strapped in his car seat in the back, survived, but the impact had done something to his skull, to the delicate machinery of his right ear. The doctors told his grandmother, Dorothy Brooks, that the boy was lucky to be alive. The hearing loss was permanent, they said, but it could have been so much worse. He could walk, talk, think. He would live a normal life, they assured her. They just didn't mention that normal would come with a lifetime of people speaking too loudly, of teachers assuming he couldn't keep up, of other children mocking the way he sometimes missed words, the way he had to turn his head to hear properly. Dorothy Brooks, who everyone called Grandma Dot, was 63 years old when she suddenly became a mother again. She lived in a small wooden house on the poor side of town, the side where the roads weren't paved quite as smooth, where the streetlights flickered more often, where people worked 2 jobs and still struggled to pay bills. Her house was small, just 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom with pipes that groaned in winter, but it was filled with something money couldn't buy: love. And music. The centerpiece of Grandma Dot's living room wasn't a television or fancy furniture. It was an upright piano, old, and battered, its ivory keys yellowed with age, several notes slightly out of tune. It had belonged to her mother, who had taught Dot to play, who had taught her that music was the language of the soul, that when words failed, Music spoke. For 40 years, Dorothy Brooks had been the pianist at Little Bethel Baptist Church, her fingers dancing across the keys every Sunday morning, every Wednesday evening, filling that small wooden church with hymns that made people weep, that made them shout, that made them believe in something bigger than their hardscrabble lives. When Elijah came to live with her, still grieving in ways his 5-year-old mind couldn't process, still waking up screaming from nightmares of twisted metal and broken glass, Grandma Dot did what she knew best. She played. She would sit at that piano and play soft, gentle melodies while Elijah curled up on the couch, his small body still sometimes trembling with phantom fears. She played hymns and spirituals, jazz and blues, anything that might reach the broken places inside him that words couldn't touch. The hearing loss affected everything. At school, Elijah had to sit in the front row, had to constantly ask teachers to repeat themselves, had to work twice as hard as other students to keep up. Kids can be cruel, especially to those who are different, and Elijah was different in ways that made him an easy target. They called him half-deaf Eli. They would whisper things on his right side, knowing he couldn't hear them, then laugh when he turned his head in confusion. During group projects, partners would deliberately speak quietly, watching him struggle, enjoying his discomfort. In the cafeteria, they would mock the way he sometimes spoke too loudly, not realizing his own volume. The physical reminder of the accident wasn't just the hearing loss. Elijah walked with a slight limp, his right leg having been broken in 3 places that night, and never quite healing perfectly straight. It wasn't severe, just enough to be noticeable, just enough to give the bullies one more thing to ridicule. By the time he was 12, Elijah had learned to make himself small, invisible. He spoke as little as possible, ate lunch alone, spent his free time in the library or hurrying home. He built walls around himself, not out of anger, but out of survival. The world had decided what he was, what he couldn't be, and he had almost started to believe it. Almost. Because there was one place where his disability didn't matter. One place where the hearing loss, the limp, the whispers and stares all faded away into nothing. One place where Elijah Brooks wasn't the damaged, pitied, mocked boy from the poor side of town. At the piano, he was free. It started when he was 7. Grandma Dot was practicing a particularly complex hymn for Sunday service, her aged fingers stumbling over a difficult passage. She was frustrated, muttering under her breath, when she felt a small presence beside her. Elijah stood there, barely tall enough to see over the keys, his face serious. Without a word, he reached up and played the passage perfectly. The notes flowed from his small fingers, as if they had always been there waiting. He played it once, then looked up at his grandmother with those big, dark eyes that had seen too much too soon. Grandma Dot sat frozen, her mouth open. "Eli, baby, have you been practicing when I'm not home?" He shook his head. "I just heard you playing it. It goes like this, doesn't it?" That was the moment Dorothy Brooks realized her grandson had a gift. Not just talent, not just ability, but something deeper, something almost mystical. Elijah could hear a piece of music once and play it back perfectly. He understood harmony instinctively, could improvise variations on melodies without thinking, could make that old battered piano sing in ways she never could. She began teaching him properly. Every day after school, while other kids played outside or watched television, Elijah sat at the piano with his grandmother. She taught him to read music, though he barely needed it. She taught him technique, proper finger placement, how to use his whole body when he played. But mostly she taught him that music wasn't just about hearing. "You feel it, baby," she would tell him, placing his hand over her heart as she played. "Right here. Music lives here before it ever reaches your ears. And Elijah did feel it. When he played, something happened that he couldn't explain to anyone, something miraculous. His partial deafness, which made the rest of his life so difficult, somehow made him more attuned to music. He felt the vibrations through his fingers, through the bench, through his entire body. He heard with more than his ears. He heard with his soul. The piano became his refuge, his sanctuary, his voice, when he had no words. When kids at school were cruel, he would come home and play until his fingers ached. When he missed the parents he barely remembered, he played the lullabies his mother used to sing the songs Grandma Dot said Angela had loved. When the world felt too heavy, too hard, too unfair, he played, and for those moments he wasn't broken. He was whole. By the time he was 14, Elijah was composing his own pieces, complex arrangements that made Grandma Dot weep. By 15, he was playing at church, his fingers moving across those keys with a maturity and depth that seemed impossible for someone so young. People came from other churches just to hear him play. They would close their eyes and swear they were listening to someone 3 times his age, someone who had lived a full life and was pouring all that experience into the music. But outside of Little Bethel Baptist Church, outside of that small community that knew him and loved him, no one knew what Elijah could do. He never performed at school. He never entered competitions. He never told anyone except Grandma Dot about the dreams he had. The impossible dreams of someday studying music seriously, of maybe just maybe becoming the kind of pianist whose name people knew. Those were foolish dreams for a boy like him. Everyone said so. He was poor, black, disabled from a nothing town in the middle of nowhere. Boys like him didn't become concert pianists. Boys like him were lucky to graduate high school, to get a job at the factory or the Walmart, to make something simple and small of their lives. Elijah tried to accept this. He tried to push the dreams down to be realistic, to understand his place in the world. But the music wouldn't let him. By 17, Elijah's life had settled into a predictable routine. He attended Ashford High School, maintained decent grades, despite having to work harder than everyone else, and kept to himself. After school, he worked at Morrison's hardware store, stocking shelves, and helping customers for $8 an hour. The Morrisons, an elderly white couple who had owned the store for 40 years, were kind to him. Let him take time off when he needed it, paid him under the table so he could help Grandma Dot with bills. Every penny mattered. Grandma Dot's Social Security barely covered the mortgage and utilities. Elijah's paychecks bought groceries, kept the heat on. In winter, paid for the medication she needed for her arthritis and high blood pressure. There was never anything extra. Never enough for luxuries like new clothes or eating out, or God forbid, college. College. The word seemed almost laughable. Elijah's guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, had called him into her office during his junior year with that sympathetic look he had come to hate, the one that said, "I feel sorry for you, but there's nothing I can do." "Elijah, you're a smart boy," she had said, folding her hands on her desk. "Your grades are good, considering your challenges. Have you thought about what you want to do after graduation?" He had thought about it constantly, but he knew better than to say what he really wanted. "I'll probably work full-time at Morrison's," he had told her. "Maybe take some classes at the community college if I can afford it." She had nodded, relieved. "That sounds very practical, very sensible." Then she had dismissed him, probably to meet with students who had real futures, real options, real chances. But at night, alone in his small bedroom, with its water-stained ceiling and single window that overlooked the overgrown backyard, Elijah let himself dream. He would put on his cheap headphones, the ones he'd bought at the dollar store, that only worked in his left ear anyway, and listened to the great pianists. Horowitz, Rubinstein, Richter, Argerich. He would close his eyes and imagine his own fingers creating those sounds. Imagine performing in great concert halls. Imagine a life where he wasn't held back by everything he was born into. These were dangerous dreams. They made the reality of his life harder to bear. But he couldn't stop them any more than he could stop breathing. Grandma Dot knew. She saw the longing in his eyes when he played, heard it in every note. It broke her heart because she knew what the world would say, what the world always said to people like them. Know your place. Accept your lot. Don't reach too high, or you'll only fall harder. But Dorothy Brooks had not raised her grandson to accept limitations. She had not poured her love and her knowledge and her faith into this boy only to watch him settle for less than what he was capable of. She was 75 years old, her hands gnarled with arthritis, her body tired from a lifetime of hard work and heartbreak. But she had one fight left in her. She was going to make sure her grandson got his chance. It was a cold February morning when everything changed. Elijah arrived at school early, as he always did, to avoid the crowds. The hallway was nearly empty as he made his way to his locker. He was spinning the combination when he heard Mr. Patterson's voice. "Elijah, wait up." Marcus Patterson was the music teacher at Ashford High, a thin man in his 40s with kind eyes and a perpetual coffee stain on his tie. He was one of the few teachers who treated Elijah like he had actual potential, who didn't speak to him in that slow, loud voice people used with the disabled. "Morning, Mr. Patterson," Elijah said, turning to face him fully, so his good ear was toward the teacher. Mr. Patterson was holding a glossy brochure, and his face held an expression Elijah couldn't quite read. Excitement, nervousness. "I want you to look at something," Mr. Patterson said, handing him the brochure. The cover showed a beautiful brick building surrounded by trees with elegant windows and the words, "Harrington Music Conservatory," in gold letters. Elijah's stomach tightened. He knew about Harrington. Everyone in the music world did. It was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country, had produced Grammy winners and symphony directors and world-renowned soloists. It was also ridiculously expensive and impossibly selective. "Mr. Patterson, I can't," he started, but the teacher held up a hand. "Just listen. Every year, Harrington offers 5 full scholarships to exceptional students. Full ride, tuition, room, board, everything. They hold auditions in Atlanta next month." He paused, then added softly, "Elijah, I've been teaching music for 23 years. I've seen a lot of talented kids. But you, son, you're something special. You need training that I can't give you, opportunities that this town can't provide." Elijah stared at the brochure, his hands trembling slightly. The photographs inside showed practice rooms with beautiful grand pianos, concert halls, with perfect acoustic students who looked confident and privileged and nothing like him. "They'd never pick me," he whispered. "They'd be fools not to," Mr. Patterson said firmly. "I've already written you a recommendation letter. I've included recordings of your performances at church. But you have to do your part. You have to show up and audition." That evening, Elijah sat at the kitchen table with Grandma Dot, the brochure spread between them. The deadline for audition applications was in 1 week. The auditions were in 4 weeks. It might as well have been a million years away. "We can't afford the bus ticket to Atlanta," Elijah said quietly. "And even if we could, what's the point? Look at these kids." He pointed to the photos in the brochure, students in expensive clothes, standing next to pristine instruments that probably cost more than their entire house. Grandma Dot studied the brochure for a long moment, then looked up at her grandson with steel in her eyes. "You listen to me, Elijah Brooks. I've watched you play that piano since you were 7 years old. I've seen the way music pours out of you like water from a spring. I've heard you play pieces that make grown men cry, that make people believe in God all over again." She reached across the table and gripped his hand. "Your mama had a gift for singing. Lord, that woman could sing. Before she passed, she made me promise something. She made me promise that if you had any talent, any gift at all, I wouldn't let the world beat it out of you, that I'd fight for you to have chances she never got." Tears were streaming down Grandma Dot's weathered face now. "I'm 75 years old, baby. I won't be here forever. But before I go, I need to know I kept that promise. I need to know I gave you your shot." Elijah felt his own eyes burning. "Grandma, we'll find a way to get you to Atlanta," she said, her voice brooking no argument. "We'll find a way to get you in front of those judges. And then you're going to sit at that piano, and you're going to show them what God gave you. You hear me?" He nodded, unable to speak. "Now," she said, wiping her eyes and sitting up straighter, "what are you going to play for them?" The next 4 weeks were a blur of preparation sacrifice and mounting anxiety. Mr. Patterson helped Elijah select his audition piece, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor. It was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. The piece was notoriously difficult, requiring not just technical mastery, but deep emotional understanding. But Mr. Patterson insisted. "They need to see everything you can do," he explained. "Technical skill, emotional depth, endurance, this piece has it all. And besides," he added with a slight smile, "Rachmaninoff wrote some of his best work when he was fighting his own demons. I think you'll understand it better than most." Elijah practiced obsessively. He woke at 5 in the morning to get in 2 hours before school. He played during his lunch break in the empty band room. After his shift at Morrison's, he'd come home and play until his fingers cramped, and Grandma Dot had to physically pull him away from the piano. The piece was brutal. The opening with its heavy doom-laden chords demanded strength and precision. The second movement required a delicate touch and profound lyricism. The finale was a technical showcase, with cascading runs and thundering octaves that could make or break a performance. "You're trying too hard," Grandma Dot told him one evening, listening from her chair in the corner. "You're playing the notes, but you're not playing the music." "What's the difference?" he asked, frustrated. She stood up slowly, her joints protesting, and came to sit beside him on the piano bench. "When I play for church, I'm not thinking about the notes. I'm thinking about Mrs. Johnson in the 3rd row who just lost her husband. I'm thinking about young Tommy who's struggling with his addiction. I'm thinking about all the pain and hope and fear in that room, and I'm trying to speak to it." She placed her hand over his heart. Rachmaninoff wrote this after he had a breakdown, after everyone said he'd never compose again. Every note is him fighting back, proving the world wrong. You understand that, don't you? You know what it's like when everyone thinks you can't do something. Elijah nodded slowly. Then don't play the notes. Play that feeling. Play your story. Something clicked. The next time he played through the concerto, something was different. The notes were the same, but the meaning behind them had changed. He wasn't just executing a difficult piece of music. He was telling his story, every moment of pain and struggle and determination poured into those keys. Meanwhile, Grandma Dot was fighting her own battle. The bus tickets to Atlanta cost $60 each. They needed at least one night in a cheap motel, which was another $40. Add in food and the application fee, and they needed almost $200 they didn't have. She sold her mother's china set, the one she'd been saving to pass down to Elijah someday. She sold her wedding ring, the simple gold band James's father had given her 50 years ago. She took on extra work, cleaning houses for wealthy families on the other side of town, her arthritic hands scrubbing toilets and mopping floors despite the pain. Elijah found out about the ring. He came home from school to find Grandma Dot sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her bare finger, tears running silently down her face. "Grandma, no," he said, his voice breaking. "You can't. Not your ring." She looked up at him, and her face was fierce despite the tears. "It's just metal, baby. Just a thing. You're what matters. Your future is what matters. Your grandfather would understand. Your mama would understand. I can't let you do this." "It's already done," she said simply. "Now you practice. You make sure every sacrifice means something." The morning of March 15th dawned cold and gray. Elijah barely slept the night before, running through the Rachmaninoff in his mind over and over, his fingers twitching against the blanket. At 4:30 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and went to the piano, playing softly so as not to wake Grandma Dot, though he suspected she wasn't sleeping either. They left the house at 5, walking the 6 blocks to the Greyhound station in the pre-dawn darkness. Elijah wore his only suit, a threadbare navy blue one they'd found at Goodwill for $12. It was a size too big, but Grandma Dot had altered it as best she could. His shoes were old dress shoes, from church polished until they shined, but still showing their age. Grandma Dot wore her Sunday best, a purple dress, and matching hat, her good coat that had been good 20 years ago. She carried a small overnight bag with their few belongings, and a packed lunch sandwiches made from the last of the bread and lunch meat, because they couldn't afford to eat at restaurants. The bus station was nearly empty at that hour. They sat on hard plastic chairs and waited. Elijah couldn't stop his leg from bouncing, a nervous habit that made his limp more pronounced. Grandma Dot reached over and placed a steady hand on his knee. "You breathe, baby," she said softly. "You've got this. God's got this." The bus to Atlanta was half empty, smelled of diesel and old upholstery, and other people's fast food. They sat near the back, Elijah by the window, watching as Ashford disappeared behind them. He'd never been more than 50 miles from home in his entire life. Now he was heading to a city of millions to audition at a school where he'd be competing against kids who'd had private lessons since they were 5, who'd played in youth orchestras and won competitions, and never once wondered if they could afford their next meal. The drive took 3 hours. Elijah dozed fitfully, his head against the cold window, dreaming confused dreams of piano keys and judgmental faces. Grandma Dot sat silent and awake beside him, her hand occasionally reaching out to pat his arm to remind him she was there. When Atlanta came into view, Elijah's breath caught. He'd seen cities on television, of course, but the reality was overwhelming. Buildings that scraped the sky highways with 8 lanes of traffic, more people visible in a single glance than lived in all of Ashford. The Harrington Music Conservatory was in one of the wealthy neighborhoods, surrounded by other prestigious institutions and expensive homes. Their cheap motel was on the other side of the city, in a neighborhood that reminded Elijah of home in all the wrong ways. But at least it was clean, and the bed was soft, and Grandma Dot had negotiated a rate they could almost afford. They arrived at Harrington at 2 in the afternoon, 4 hours before Elijah's scheduled audition time. The campus was beautiful in a way that felt almost hostile to him. Manicured lawns, old brick buildings covered in ivy, students walking past, in expensive clothes, carrying instrument cases that probably cost more than a semester's tuition at the community college. The main auditorium where the auditions were being held was breathtaking. A grand concert hall with soaring ceilings, perfect acoustics, and a stage that held the most beautiful Steinway piano Elijah had ever seen. It gleamed under the stage lights, its surface so perfectly polished he could see reflections in it. Other auditionees were warming up in practice rooms. Elijah could hear them through the walls' scales and arpeggios fragments of Mozart and Chopin played with the casual confidence of people who'd never doubted they belonged in a place like this. He and Grandma Dot found seats in a corner of the lobby, trying to be invisible among the wealthy parents and students, feeling the weight of every glance that took in their cheap clothes, their obvious poverty, their clear otherness in this space. "Remember what you came here to do?" Grandma Dot whispered, gripping his hand. "You didn't come here to fit in. You came here to play." The lobby of Harrington's auditorium was designed to intimidate. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. The walls were covered with photographs of famous alumni conductors, soloists, composers, whose names everyone knew. Display cases held awards and accolades, proof of the conservatory's prestige and selectivity. And everywhere, were the other candidates. They were nothing like Elijah. These were children of privilege products of the best music schools in the country. A girl in a designer dress discussed her recent performance with the Boston Youth Orchestra. A boy in an expensive suit mentioned casually that he'd just returned from studying in Vienna. Their parents stood nearby, sophisticated and confident, discussing music theory and audition strategy in the casual tones of people for whom this was just another step in a carefully planned journey. Elijah felt like a fraud. His suit suddenly seemed even shabbier, his shoes more scuffed. He was hyper-aware of his slight limp as he walked to the registration table, of the way he had to turn his head to hear properly of every single way he didn't belong. The woman at the registration table was professional, but cold. She took his name, checked him off a list, and handed him a number 47. There were 80 students auditioning today. Only 5 would receive scholarships. "You'll wait in the holding area," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "When your number is called, proceed to the stage entrance. You'll have 5 minutes to warm up on the piano before your official audition begins. You may perform one piece of your choosing, maximum 15 minutes. The panel will stop you if you run over time." Elijah nodded, his mouth too dry to speak. The holding area was a large room with uncomfortable chairs and a palpable tension. Students sat clutching sheet music, running through finger exercises, taking deep breaths. Some were friendly, making small talk to calm their nerves. Others were competitive, sizing up the opposition. One girl, blonde and pretty, in an expensive black dress, looked Elijah up and down when he entered. She leaned over to whisper something to her friend, and they both giggled. Elijah's face burned, but he kept his head down, finding a seat in the corner. Grandma Dot sat beside him, her presence a solid comfort. She pulled out a thermos of sweet tea she'd brought from home and poured him a cup with shaking hands. "Don't you listen to them," she said quietly. "Don't you give them 1 second of your mind." But it was hard not to listen hard, not to feel the weight of all the assumptions being made about him. He could see it in their faces, confusion about why someone like him was even here. Pity, maybe? Or contempt? Or just that peculiar blindness that comes from privilege, the inability to see beyond their own narrow experience. Numbers 1 through 10 were called. Students disappeared through the stage door, and muffled sounds of piano music filtered back too distant to make out the details. Some came back crying, others beaming. The waiting was excruciating. At number 23, a boy about Elijah's age returned to the holding area, his face red with frustration. "Director Ashford," he said to no one in particular, "is a complete jerk." He stopped me after 4 minutes, said my interpretation lacked maturity. He looked around, his eyes landing on Elijah, seeming to find a target for his anger. "Good luck with him. He's brutal." The name sent a chill through Elijah. Director Richard Ashford. He'd heard of him, of course. Everyone in classical music had. He was a legend, brilliant, demanding, known for producing exceptional musicians, and for his absolutely uncompromising standards. He was also known for being arrogant, for his scathing critiques for reducing students to tears with a single comment. At number 40, a girl emerged from the stage area, sobbing so hard she could barely walk. Her mother rushed to embrace her. "What happened?" the mother demanded. "He said I play like a robot," the girl choked out. "He said I should reconsider my career choices." A murmur went through the room. Even by Ashford standards, this seemed harsh. When number 46 was called the student ahead of Elijah, the tension in the room was almost unbearable. Elijah's hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The Rachmaninoff, which he could play in his sleep at home, suddenly seemed impossible. What if he froze? What if his fingers wouldn't cooperate? What if the partial deafness which he'd learned to compensate for became a problem in the different acoustics of the auditorium? Grandma Dot took both his hands in hers. "Listen to me. You are Elijah James Brooks. You are the grandson of Dorothy Mae Brooks and the son of Angela Marie Brooks, who had the voice of an angel. You carry their music in your blood. You carry their strength in your heart. That man in there, whoever he is, whatever he says, cannot take that from you." "You hear me?" Elijah nodded, unable to speak, around the lump in his throat. "You go in there, and you play for your mama. You play for all of us who never got the chance. You play like you're in our living room, like you're playing for God himself. And you remember that no matter what happens, I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you." Number 47, Elijah Brooks. The voice came from a young assistant, clipboard in hand, professional smile fixed in place. This was it. Elijah stood his legs, feeling weak. He picked up his folder with the sheet music he probably wouldn't need, having memorized every note months ago. Grandma Dot stood too, pulling him into a tight embrace. "You got this, baby," she whispered. "Now go show them." The walk to the stage felt endless. The assistant led him through a side door down a corridor lined with practice rooms where he could hear snippets of music scales and warm-ups. His own warm-up time would be minimal, 5 minutes to adjust to an unfamiliar piano to test the acoustics to try to calm his racing heart. Then he was there, standing in the wings of the stage, looking out at the massive auditorium. The house lights were dim, but he could see the panel of judges in the front row. 5 people sitting behind a long table with notebooks and water bottles and the power to change his entire life. And in the center, unmistakable even from this distance, was director Richard Ashford. He was exactly as Elijah had imagined, late 50s, silver hair, perfectly styled, expensive suit, an expression of perpetual judgment. He was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, looking bored, before Elijah had even stepped onto the stage. "Mr. Brooks," the assistant said, gesturing toward the stage, "you have 5 minutes to warm up. Your official audition will begin when director Ashford signals." Elijah stepped out onto the stage. The lights were bright, disorienting after the dim wings. The Steinway grand piano sat center stage, gleaming and perfect and terrifying. He walked toward it, his limp more pronounced than usual, his nerves making his gait uneven. He heard it before he reached the piano, a sound from the judge's table. A sound that might have been a scoff or a snort of disbelief. He turned his head slightly, his good ear toward the sound. Director Ashford was staring at him with an expression of barely concealed distaste. He leaned over to whisper something to the woman beside him, and she glanced at Elijah, then away, her mouth tightening. Elijah reached the piano, sat on the bench, adjusted it. His hands were shaking so badly he had to clasp them together for a moment. He took a deep breath, positioned his fingers over the keys, and played a few scales to warm up to get a feel for the instrument. The piano was extraordinary. The touch was responsive, the tone rich and full. For a moment, Elijah forgot where he was, forgot the judges, forgot his fear. He played a few measures of the Rachmaninoff just to hear how it sounded in this space. That's sufficient. Director Ashford's voice rang out, cutting through the music. It was a cold voice, clipped and aristocratic. "We're ready when you are, Mr. Brooks." Though I must say, he added, and Elijah heard the pause that followed. Heavy with meaning. "I'm quite curious what made you think you were qualified to audition for Harrington." Elijah turned on the bench to face the judge's table fully to see if he'd heard correctly. Director Ashford was looking at him with a faint smirk, his eyebrows raised in a parody of polite inquiry. "I'm sorry," Elijah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your application?" Ashford continued, picking up a paper from the table. "Says you're from..." He squinted at the page. "Ashford, Georgia. I don't believe I've ever heard of it. And your teacher is another pause, a high school band director?" He said it the way someone might say garbage collector or fast food worker. The other judges looked uncomfortable. The woman beside Ashford shifted in her seat, but no one spoke up. "You also failed to list any competition wins, any ensemble experience, any performance history beyond," Ashford glanced at the paper again, "playing at a Baptist church." He let out a short laugh. "Mr. Brooks' Harrington Music Conservatory accepts only the most exceptional students from around the world, students who have demonstrated not just talent, but achievement, refinement, and dedication. What we don't accept is," he looked Elijah up and down, taking in the cheap suit, the visible nervousness, the way he had to turn his head to hear properly, "projects." The word hung in the air like a slap. Projects. The implication was clear: we don't accept charity cases. We don't accept people who need help. We don't accept people like you. Elijah felt his face burning. His throat was tight. In the audience, though, he couldn't see her. He knew Grandma Dot had heard. She would be sitting there, her heart breaking, having witnessed her grandson being humiliated in front of everyone. However, Ashford continued leaning back in his chair with the magnanimity of someone bestowing an undeserved favor. "You're here now. You might as well play. It will be a slight smile, educational for everyone." The unstated message, educational, to see what happens when someone reaches too far above their station. Elijah turned back to the piano, his vision blurring slightly. His hands were shaking worse now. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get off this stage, to stop subjecting himself to this cruelty. But he thought of Grandma Dot selling her wedding ring. He thought of Mr. Patterson writing recommendations on his behalf. He thought of all the hours of practice, all the sacrifices, all the hope. He placed his hands on the keys. They felt foreign, suddenly unfamiliar. The opening chords of the Rachmaninoff required strength and confidence, and he had neither at this moment. "Before you begin," Ashford's voice came again. "I do have one question. Your application mentions a hearing impairment." He made it sound like an accusation. Elijah froze. "Yes, sir. I'm partially deaf in my right ear." There was a long silence. Then Ashford said, his voice dripping with false concern. "How tragic. I wonder, Mr. Brooks, how exactly does someone with a hearing impairment expect to pursue a career in music? Can you even hear the full range of the piano? Can you perceive the subtle tonal qualities that separate adequate playing from true artistry?" The other judges were shifting uncomfortably now. One man older with kind eyes opened his mouth as if to protest, but Ashford held up a hand. "I'm genuinely curious," Ashford continued, "because it seems to me that pursuing music with such a disability is rather like a blind person trying to become a painter. Admirable determination, perhaps, but ultimately futile. Wouldn't it be kinder to tell you now that this path isn't realistic for someone with your, shall we say, limitations? It wasn't just cruelty. It was assassination. Ashford was taking every insecurity Elijah had ever felt, every doubt and fear and moment of wondering if he was foolish to dream, and he was speaking them aloud in front of everyone. He was putting into words what Elijah sometimes thought at 3 in the morning when he couldn't sleep. Maybe I can't do this. Maybe I'm not meant for this. Maybe the world is right about who I am and what I'm capable of. In the dim audience, Grandma Dot sat with tears streaming down her face. Her hands clenched so tightly they were trembling. Every word was a knife to her heart, watching her grandson be torn down by this arrogant man who knew nothing about struggle, nothing about fighting for every small victory, nothing about the kind of courage it took for Elijah to even be on that stage. Other students in the holding area, listening through speakers, so they could hear the auditions, were whispering. Some looked shocked. Others, the ones who had snickered at Elijah earlier, looked vindicated, as if their judgment of him had been confirmed by this authority figure. Elijah sat at the piano, hands resting on the keys, and for a moment he genuinely considered leaving. Just standing up, walking off the stage, and never looking back. What was the point? Even if he played perfectly, which seemed impossible now with his hands shaking and his mind spinning, Ashford had already decided. The humiliation was complete. "Mr. Brooks," Ashford prompted. "Are you going to play, or shall we move on to the next candidate? I'm sure everyone's time is valuable." That last comment, the casual dismissiveness of it, the implication that Elijah wasn't just unqualified, but was actively wasting everyone's time, finally broke through the paralysis. Because Elijah suddenly realized what was happening. This wasn't about music. This wasn't about qualifications or standards or what was best for Harrington Music Conservatory. This was about power. This was about a man who had spent his entire life at the top of a hierarchy, surrounded by privilege and wealth, and people who looked like him being confronted with someone who challenged his comfortable assumptions about who belonged in his world. Director Richard Ashford was afraid. Not of Elijah specifically, but of what Elijah represented, the idea that talent and passion and dedication might matter more than pedigree and money and connections. The idea that the gates he'd spent his life guarding might not be as necessary or as just as he'd always believed. And in that moment of clarity, sitting at that beautiful piano in that intimidating auditorium, Elijah Brooks made a decision. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't give Ashford the satisfaction of being proven right. He would play. And he would make them all listen. But first he needed a moment. Just one moment to gather himself to find the music again, beneath all the fear and anger and hurt. "May I have a moment?" Elijah asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "Just to—" he swallowed to center myself. Ashford waved a hand dismissively. "By all means. Take all the time you need." With a glance at his watch, in no particular hurry. Elijah stood from the piano bench and walked to the far side of the stage, into the shadows away from the bright lights. He turned his back to the judges, looking out at the vast darkness of the empty auditorium. His heart was racing, his breathing shallow. He closed his eyes. And he remembered. He remembered being 5 years old, sitting in the back seat of his parents' car. His mother was singing something she always did when they drove. She had such a beautiful voice, warm and clear. His father was laughing at something she'd said. Rain was falling outside the window, drops racing each other down the glass. Elijah had been playing with a toy car, making it drive along the back of the front seat, making engine noises. Then lights, bright lights coming toward them. His mother's voice no longer singing, screaming James. His father yanking the wheel. The world spinning glass, shattering metal, crumpling, and then silence. Such profound silence. He remembered waking up in the hospital, his head bandaged, his leg in a cast, and Grandma Dot sitting beside the bed, her face aged by grief. He remembered asking for his mama, his daddy, and the way Grandma Dot's face had crumbled before she pulled herself together and said, "They had to go away, baby. But they left you with me. You're going to stay with me now." He remembered the first time he'd realized he couldn't hear properly anymore. One of the doctors had been talking to Grandma Dot on his right side, and their words had been muddy, distant. He'd turned his head and suddenly could hear again. The panic of that moment, the realization that something was wrong, something was different, something was broken. He remembered the kids at school, the taunts and mockery, the isolation. He remembered wanting to disappear, to be invisible, to be anyone but himself. And he remembered the first time music had saved him. He was 7 years old in Grandma Dot's living room, listening to her practice for Sunday service. She was playing "His Eye is on the Sparrow," her favorite hymn. The melody was simple but beautiful, and something about it reached into the broken places inside him and held them together just for a moment. "Why does it make me feel better?" he'd asked her. Grandma Dot had stopped playing and pulled him onto her lap. "Music is God's medicine, baby. When words can't reach us, when the hurt is too deep for talking, music speaks directly to the soul." "But I can't hear it right," he'd said, touching his damaged ear. Not all of it. She had taken his hand and placed it on the piano's wooden body, then played a single note. He felt it vibrate through his palm, up his arm, into his chest. You feel that she'd asked. Music isn't just sound, Eli. It's vibration. It's emotion. It's something bigger than just what goes in your ears. Your mama used to say that music was a language that needed no words, that crossed every barrier. She was right. You don't need perfect hearing to understand music. You need a perfect heart. He remembered his mother, though the memory was more feeling than image now. The warmth of her embrace, the sound of her laughter, the way she would hum while she cooked dinner, unconsciously creating melodies that floated through their small apartment. Before the accident, before he could even remember, she used to play piano with him. Grandma Dot had told him the story countless times, how Angela would sit little Elijah on her lap at the piano, guide his tiny fingers to the keys, and they would play together. How he would giggle and bang the keys with no particular rhythm, but sometimes his random notes would form something almost musical, and Angela would build on it, turning her baby's noise into a real melody. Your mama said you had music in your soul, Grandma Dot had told him. She said some people are born with it like a sixth sense. She had it too, and she gave it to you. Standing on that stage now, Elijah realized he wasn't playing for Harrington Music Conservatory. He wasn't playing to prove director Ashford wrong, though he wanted that too. He was playing for his mother, for the woman who had filled his earliest years with music and love, and then left him too soon. He was playing for Grandma Dot, who had sacrificed everything to give him this chance. He was playing for every person who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, told they didn't belong. He was playing because music was the one language where his disabilities didn't matter, where his poverty didn't matter, where all the barriers the world put up couldn't stop him. Elijah opened his eyes and turned back toward the stage. But before he could return to the piano, a sound from the audience stopped him. A voice, clear and strong, despite the slight tremor of age cutting through the tension in the auditorium. "Excuse me." Everyone turned. Grandma Dot was standing in the audience, her purple dress and hat making her visible even in the dim light. She was gripping the back of the seat in front of her, her chin raised high. Grandma Elijah said, his voice cracking. "It's okay, It's not okay," she said, her voice carrying surprisingly well in the acoustics of the auditorium. She wasn't yelling, but there was a force to her words that demanded attention. "And I think you need to hear something before you play." Director Ashford stood up. "Madam, this is highly irregular. Audience members are not permitted to—" "I don't much care what's permitted," Grandma Dot said. And there was steel in her voice now, the steel of a woman who had survived 7 decades of hardship and wasn't about to be intimidated by an arrogant man in an expensive suit. "You just spent 10 minutes tearing down my grandson, questioning whether he has any right to be here, whether he's even capable of pursuing music because of his disability. Well, I have some things you should know." The other judges were watching transfixed. The kind-looking older man had a slight smile on his face. Even Ashford, for all his bluster, seemed momentarily uncertain about how to handle this unexpected disruption. "That boy Grandma Dot," continued pointing at Elijah, "has been playing piano since he was 7 years old. Not because he had fancy teachers or went to expensive music schools, because music was the one thing that helped him survive losing his parents. Because it was the one place where being partially deaf didn't matter, where being poor didn't matter, where all the things people like you judge him for didn't matter." She took a shaky breath, and Elijah could see tears on her face, but her voice didn't waver. "I've worked 3 jobs to keep him fed and clothed. I sold my wedding ring, the last thing I had of my husband, who's been gone 15 years, to get him to this audition. I've watched him practice until his fingers bled, listened to him play through pain and exhaustion and doubt." Madam Ashford tried again, but Grandma Dot wasn't finished. "I've also watched him play at funerals and make grieving families weep with comfort. I've seen him play at our church and bring people to their feet in joy. I've heard him create music that makes you believe in something bigger than yourself. And you know what the difference is between him and those other students you've heard today?" She paused, looking directly at Ashford. "Those students play because they were told they were talented, because it was expected of them, because it was the next step in their carefully planned lives. My grandson plays because he has to. Because music isn't a career choice for him, it's survival. It's how he processes the world. It's how he honors his mama, who died too young and never got to see the man he's becoming." Tears were flowing freely down her face now, but she wasn't done. She turned to Elijah, her voice gentler now. "Baby, I need you to listen to me. This man's opinion doesn't define you. This school's decision doesn't define you. What defines you is what you do right now. Are you going to let him make you small? Are you going to accept his limitations? Or are you going to sit at that piano and show all of them what you're made of?" The auditorium was completely silent. Even Ashford seemed at a loss for words. Elijah felt something break open in his chest. All the fear and doubt and shame that had been building up not just from the last half hour, but from his entire life cracked and began to fall away. Because Grandma Dot was right. This audition wasn't about permission or acceptance or fitting into someone else's idea of who deserved to be here. This was about showing them who he was. This was about refusing to be made small. "I raised you to be brave," Grandma Dot said, her voice softer now, but still clear enough for the whole auditorium to hear. "I raised you to know your worth. So you go sit at that piano and you play like you're playing for your mama. You play like you're in our living room and there's nobody to judge you, nobody to tell you that you can't. You play the truth of who you are, and let that be enough." She sat down, then slowly, her momentary strength seeming to leave her as quickly as it had come. But she kept her eyes on Elijah, and in them, he saw everything: love, pride, hope, and an absolute, unshakable faith in him. Elijah turned to face the judge's table. Director Ashford had sat back down, his expression unreadable now. The other judges looked uncomfortable, moved, uncertain. The whole atmosphere in the auditorium had shifted. "Thank you," Elijah said to Grandma Dot, his voice thick with emotion. Then he turned to Ashford. "I apologize for the disruption, Director. I'm ready to play now." There was a long moment of silence. Director Ashford seemed to be weighing his options, clearly thrown off balance by Grandma Dot's intervention. Finally, he made a gesture that might have been acquiescence, or might have been dismissal. "Very well," he said, his voice tight. "Proceed." Elijah walked back to the piano bench. His hands were steadier now. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had been joined by something stronger purpose. Determination. And yes, anger. Righteous anger at every person who had ever made him feel less than who had assumed his disability or his poverty meant he was somehow unworthy. Before he played, Elijah closed his eyes and thought about the other performers he'd heard earlier in the day. The students who had gone before him, those talented, privileged kids with their perfect techniques and their expensive educations. He'd listened to a girl play Chopin with flawless precision. Every note had been perfect, every trill executed with mechanical accuracy. It had been like listening to a very advanced computer play, technically impressive, but emotionally empty. He'd heard a boy play Liszt with incredible speed and dexterity, his fingers flying across the keys in passages that should have been impossible. But it had felt like showing off, like a display of athletic prowess rather than music. Look what I can do instead of listen to what I'm saying. Piece after piece, performer after performer, all demonstrating remarkable skill. But something had been missing. He couldn't quite name it then, but now sitting at the piano, he understood what it was. They were playing music they had been taught, playing pieces they had mastered through thousands of hours of lessons with renowned instructors, playing notes on a page with precision and skill. But they weren't playing from the place music lived. Elijah had never had formal training beyond what Grandma Dot and Mr. Patterson could teach him. He'd never studied with a famous instructor or attended a prestigious music school. But he had something these other students didn't. He knew what it meant to need music, to live inside it, to let it speak the things he couldn't say any other way. The Rachmaninoff he was about to play wasn't just a challenging piece he'd chosen to demonstrate his technical ability. It was his story. Every movement, every phrase, every dynamic shift corresponded to something he'd lived, something he'd felt. The opening with its heavy, fateful chords was the night of the accident. The moment everything changed, the moment innocence ended, and survival began. The second movement, lyrical and heartbreaking, was the years of living with Grandma Dot. The quiet moments of love and loss, the ache of missing parents, he barely remembered. The finale, with its triumphant resolution, was hope. The stubborn, perhaps foolish hope that had brought him to this stage, the belief that he could be more than what the world expected of him. He positioned his hands over the keys, took a deep breath. And in his mind, he heard his mother's voice one more time, clear, as if she were standing beside him. Music isn't just hearing, baby. It's feeling. Time to show them what feeling sounded like. Elijah's hands hovered over the keys for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. In that moment of suspension, he was aware of everything, the smooth, cool ivory beneath his fingertips, the faint scent of furniture polish and old wood, the weight of hundreds of eyes watching him from the darkness beyond the stage lights. He was aware of Grandma Dot in the audience, sitting forward in her seat, her hands clasped in prayer. He was aware of Director Ashford leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed, waiting for Elijah to confirm his low expectations. He was aware of the other judges, some sympathetic, some skeptical, all waiting. But most of all, he was aware of the music. It was already there, alive inside him, waiting to be released. The Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto, No. 2 in C minor. He'd played it 1,000 times in practice. He'd memorized every note, every dynamic marking, every phrase. But this would be different. This would be the first time he'd played it for others, the first time he'd try to share what the music meant to him. His hands descended. The opening chord was massive, 3 notes struck with force, introducing the main theme. Then the pattern began, heavy chords in the left hand, creating a foundation of power and inevitability, while the right hand played the melody, ominous and beautiful at once. For the first 30 seconds, Elijah played exactly as written, letting Rachmaninoff's genius speak for itself. The music was instantly recognizable. This was one of the most famous piano concertos ever written, its main theme used in countless movies and commercials. Even people who knew nothing about classical music had probably heard this melody, but hearing it live, played with full commitment on a concert grand piano, was different. The sound filled the auditorium, rich and resonant. The Steinway's beautiful tone sang out the bass notes rumbling through the floorboards, the treble clear and bell-like. In the judges' table, something shifted. The woman beside Ashford sat up straighter. The kind-looking older man leaned forward. Even Ashford's expression changed slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he suppressed it. Because from the very first notes it was clear this was not going to be merely competent. This was not going to be a plucky underdog doing his best and falling short. This was something else entirely. Elijah continued into the first major section, where the theme developed and evolved. His left hand played cascading chords while his right hand wove the melody through them. The piece required enormous technical skill, the ability to voice chords, so that melody notes rang out above the accompaniment, the physical strength to maintain power through long passages, the endurance to sustain intensity for 15 minutes. But technique was only the beginning. As Elijah played, something happened that had nothing to do with finger dexterity or memorization. He began to inhabit the music, to live inside it. His body swayed with the phrases, leaning into the crescendos, pulling back in the quieter moments. His face, which had been tight with anxiety, relaxed into an expression of deep concentration, touched with something like peace. And the limp, that slight unevenness that had marked his walk across the stage, disappeared. At the piano, his body found a different kind of balance, a different center of gravity. He was no longer a disabled boy in an ill-fitting suit. He was a conduit for something larger than himself. The partial deafness which director Ashford had suggested would make playing piano impossible proved irrelevant. Elijah didn't just hear the music with his one good ear. He felt it through his whole body. The vibrations traveled through the piano bench, up his spine. He felt the harmonies in his chest, felt the rhythm in his breath. His fingers knew the keys by touch, by muscle memory, developed through thousands of hours of practice. In the audience, Grandma Dot was crying openly now, but they were tears of pride and vindication. This was her baby playing like she always knew he could. This was her grandson, proving that every sacrifice, every dollar scraped together, every hour spent teaching him had been worth it. But it was the judge's reactions that were most telling. The woman beside Ashford was staring at Elijah with her mouth slightly open. Another judge was frantically scribbling notes. The kind older man had closed his eyes and was nodding slightly with the music, a smile on his face. And director Ashford. His expression was complex, shock certainly, but also something that might have been chagrin, or perhaps the beginning of a very uncomfortable realization that he had badly misjudged this boy. As the first major section concluded and Elijah moved into the second movement, the mood shifted. The angry, powerful opening gave way to something more introspective, more tender. This was the heart of the concerto, the place where Rachmaninoff revealed his vulnerability, his pain, his hope. Elijah played it with his eyes closed, now lost in the music. The notes were softer, but no less intense. This section required a different kind of skill, the ability to play quietly while maintaining emotional weight, to shape long melodic lines to make the piano sing rather than merely sound. And Elijah made it sing. The second movement continued a long arching melody that seemed to float above the accompaniment like a voice calling out across a vast distance. Elijah's right hand played this melody with such tenderness, such longing, that it was impossible not to think of loss of memory, of love that transcends absence. This was where Elijah thought of his mother. He'd been too young when she died to remember her face clearly, but he remembered impressions, warmth, safety, the sound of her singing. When Grandma Dot had told him that Angela loved to sing, that she had a gift for music, Elijah had clung to that knowledge. It was a connection to her, proof that he came from someone who understood the language he spoke best. As his fingers moved across the keys, he imagined what she might have looked like watching him play. Would she have been proud? Would she have been surprised? Or would she have simply nodded, knowing that this gift had always been in him, waiting to emerge? The melody swelled and receded, asking questions that couldn't be answered in words, expressing emotions too complex for language. And the audience, even those who had come prepared to be unimpressed, even those who had whispered about the poor black boy with the limp, found themselves drawn in despite themselves. Because this was the thing about true musicianship, it transcends prejudice. It bypasses the thinking brain and speaks directly to the emotional core. You can't decide not to be moved by music that's played with genuine feeling. You can't maintain your skepticism in the face of authentic expression. In the holding area, other students were listening through the speakers, and the room had gone completely silent. The girl who had giggled at Elijah earlier was staring at the speaker with tears in her eyes. The boy who had warned about director Ashford being brutal had stopped his nervous pacing and stood frozen, listening. Even in the practice rooms lining the corridors, musicians who were supposed to be warming up for their own auditions had stopped playing, drawn by the sound coming from the main auditorium. A few had crept to the doors, listening. Elijah moved through the second movement's climax a moment, where the tender melody suddenly erupted into something more powerful, more insistent. This was the moment in the piece where acceptance gave way to protest, where quiet grief became a cry of why. It required playing with controlled passion, building intensity without losing the essential beauty of the melodic line. He played it thinking of Grandma Dot, of all she had sacrificed. He played it thinking of every time someone had dismissed him, every teacher who had spoken to him, as if his disability made him stupid, every kid who had mocked his limp. He played it as if the music could reach back through time and tell his 5-year-old self, terrified and alone in a hospital bed, that everything would eventually be okay. That pain could become power. That brokenness could become beauty. The movement concluded with a return to the gentle opening theme, but transformed, now enriched by everything that had come before. Elijah played these final phrases of the second movement with a delicacy that seemed impossible given the intensity that had just preceded it. It was like watching the sun set after a storm, beautiful and peaceful and tinged with melancholy. There was a brief pause, a moment of silence between movements. In that silence, the spell might have broken. The audience might have remembered where they were, might have retreated behind their judgments and assumptions. But Elijah didn't give them time. He launched immediately into the third movement. The third movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 is a technical gauntlet. It demands everything: speed, power, precision, endurance. It features rapid passages where both hands play complex patterns, simultaneously octave runs that span the entire keyboard. Massive chords that require reaching intervals of a tenth or more, and rhythmic complexity that can trip up even experienced pianists. Elijah played it like he was possessed. His hands flew across the keys, fingers moving so fast they blurred. The opening theme was bright, energetic, almost joyful after the introspective second movement. But beneath the surface, joy was a current of intensity, of determination. This was triumph, but hard-won triumph. This was celebration that remembered the cost of victory. Left hand and right hand played in perfect coordination, creating the illusion that there were two pianists at the keyboard. When one hand played melody, the other provided complex accompaniment. When both played in unison, the power was enormous, shaking the very air of the auditorium. Technically, it was flawless. Every note was clean, every phrase properly shaped. The fast passages were controlled, not sloppy. The loud passages were powerful without being harsh. The softer moments provided contrast, giving the ear a rest before the next surge of energy. But more than that, it was musical. Elijah wasn't just executing difficult passages. He was telling the conclusion of his story. This was the part where the underdog triumphs, where years of struggle finally pay off, where the hero refuses to be defeated no matter what obstacles are placed in his path. Director Ashford was sitting forward in his chair now, all pretense of boredom or skepticism abandoned. He was watching Elijah's hands with an expression of disbelief, occasionally glancing at the other judges, as if to confirm that they were hearing what he was hearing. The other judges had stopped taking notes. They were simply listening, experiencing the performance rather than evaluating it. Because evaluation seemed almost beside the point. This wasn't a student demonstration or a technical exercise. This was art. As the third movement built toward its climax, the music became more and more intense. Rachmaninoff had structured the piece so that it kept building, kept adding layers of complexity and power until it reached a peak that felt almost unsustainable. Elijah's entire body was engaged now. He leaned into the fortissimo passages, using his weight to generate power. His shoulders, arms, back, all working together to produce the massive sound the piece required. Sweat was visible on his forehead. His collar was damp. But he didn't slow down, didn't falter. He was playing not just for the judges or the audience, but for everyone who had ever been told they couldn't, they shouldn't, they weren't good enough. He was playing for his mother who had died before seeing what her son would become. He was playing for Grandma Dot, who had bet everything on his potential. He was playing for his younger self, the scared, hurt boy who had thought the world might be right about him. And he was playing because this was who he was. Not despite his disabilities and hardships, but encompassing them, transcending them. Every struggle had shaped him, had given him the depth and fire that poured out through the music. If his life had been easy, if he'd grown up with privilege and comfort and certainty, he might have been technically proficient. But he wouldn't have been this. He wouldn't have had this particular voice, this specific fire. The final section approached a series of powerful chords interspersed with rapid runs. This was the victory lap, the musical equivalent of a champion raising their arms in triumph. But even here, Rachmaninoff and Elijah together ensured it wasn't simple or shallow. The triumph was complex, acknowledging cost, even as it celebrated achievement, the last page of the piece. Elijah could see it in his mind, though he wasn't using the sheet music. The final measures built a mounting sense of inevitability, like a wave gathering strength before crashing on the shore. The penultimate phrase was a climbing figure, ascending the keyboard with increasing power. Elijah played it with everything he had, every ounce of strength and passion and determination driving toward the conclusion. And then the final chords. Massive, definitive, leaving no room for doubt or ambiguity. Elijah's hands came down on those last notes with a force that made the piano ring, made the sound waves physically felt by everyone in the auditorium. The final chord held resonating the strings inside the piano, vibrating with the energy he'd poured into them. Elijah kept his hands on the keys, his foot on the sustain pedal, letting the sound decay naturally. His head was bowed, his breath coming in gasps. He was physically exhausted, emotionally spent. He'd given everything to that performance, held nothing back. The sound faded. The vibrations stilled. And then there was silence. Complete, profound, almost holy silence. Elijah slowly lifted his hands from the keys. He sat motionless, not sure what to do next. Part of him wanted to look at the judges to see their reactions. Part of him wanted to find Grandma Dot in the audience, but mostly he just sat there empty and full at the same time. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 15. It felt like the entire auditorium was holding its breath, suspended in the moment between the ending of the music and whatever came next. In that silence, judgments hung in the balance. Assumptions were being reconsidered. Prejudices were confronting the uncomfortable evidence that they might be wrong. Director Ashford sat, frozen, his face a complicated mixture of emotions. Shock, certainly, but also something that might have been shame, or at least the beginning of understanding that he had been cruelly, dismissively wrong. The other judges looked at each other, then at Ashford, waiting for someone to break the silence to acknowledge what they'd all just witnessed. In the audience, Grandma Dot had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She'd known Elijah was talented. She'd believed in him absolutely. But even she was overwhelmed by what she'd just heard, by the confirmation that her faith had been justified, that all the sacrifices had been worth it. The silence continued. 20 seconds now. 30. And then from the back of the auditorium, a single person began to clap. The sound of those first few claps echoed in the vast space. It was the kind, older judge, standing now applauding with enthusiasm and a broad smile on his face. He was nodding toward Elijah with open appreciation, his applause loud and genuine. For a moment, he was alone. Then the woman beside Director Ashford stood joining the applause. Then another judge. Then another. The sound built, growing from those few judges to the handful of other audience members scattered throughout the auditorium, music teachers who had brought their students to audition, administrative staff, other students who had finished their auditions and stayed to listen. Grandma Dot stood her applause fierce, despite her arthritic hands, her face radiant with pride and vindication. In the holding area, students were looking at each other in amazement. Then someone started clapping there too, and it spread, even those who had mocked Elijah earlier joining in, because denying what they'd heard was impossible. The applause grew into a roar echoing off the high ceilings of the auditorium. People were whistling, shouting, "Bravo!" It was the kind of ovation usually reserved for accomplished concert artists, not teenage auditionees. Elijah stood from the piano bench on shaky legs, turning to face the audience. He was crying now, tears he couldn't control streaming down his face. He tried to bow the way he'd seen concert pianists do, but his legs wouldn't quite cooperate. He stumbled slightly, his limp more pronounced than usual, and for a second it seemed like he might fall. But he caught himself on the piano, steadied, and managed a proper bow. The applause somehow intensified. And then slowly, director Richard Ashford stood. The auditorium quieted slightly as everyone noticed. Ashford was standing looking at Elijah with an expression that was hard to read. For a long moment, he just stood there, and Elijah couldn't tell if he was about to deliver another cutting remark or what. Then Ashford began to clap. It wasn't enthusiastic, it wasn't exuberant, but it was real. Slow, deliberate claps, and as he applauded, he nodded once toward Elijah. It was the smallest gesture, but it carried weight. It was acknowledgement. It was perhaps the beginning of an apology, though actual words hadn't yet been spoken. The other judges noticed, and the applause swelled again. The standing ovation continued for what felt like an eternity. Elijah stood on the stage, overwhelmed, not quite believing this was happening. He looked out into the audience, finding Grandma Dot, and the expression on her face was everything joy, relief, pride, love. Finally, the applause began to die down. People sat. The auditorium returned to some semblance of order, though there was an electric energy in the air, now a sense that something extraordinary had just occurred. Director Ashford held up a hand for silence. "Mr. Brooks," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the acoustics. "Would you please come down here?" Elijah's heart, which had just started to slow down, began racing again. He walked carefully down the stage steps, his limp noticeable again, and approached the judges' table. Up close, he could see Ashford's face clearly. The man looked shaken, his usual confidence disrupted. Director Ashford stood as Elijah approached. The other judges were watching this interaction closely, and there was something in their expressions that suggested this moment carried significance beyond just this one audition. Mr. Brooks Ashford began, then paused. For a man who had been so glib and cruel earlier, he seemed to be struggling to find words. "I need to apologize to you." The words hung in the air. Elijah wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Ashford continued, his voice lower now, less performative than before. "What I said earlier was inappropriate, unprofessional, and frankly inexcusable. I made assumptions about you based on factors that have nothing to do with your ability as a musician. I was wrong." He paused, then added, "Deeply wrong." He gestured to the stage, to the piano where Elijah had just played. "What you just did up there was remarkable. Not just technically proficient, though it was certainly that. But you brought something to Rachmaninoff that I haven't heard in years of listening to student auditions. You brought truth. You brought lived experience. You brought heart." The woman beside Ashford spoke up, her voice warm. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Professor Chen, the head of piano studies at Harrington. That was one of the most moving performances I've heard from a prospective student in my 15 years here. The technical mastery was impressive, but more than that, you demonstrated a musical maturity that usually takes years to develop." The kind older judge, the one who had applauded first, added, "Young man, you have a gift. A genuine, rare gift. The kind of gift that makes me remember why I went into music in the first place." Elijah stood there, not quite able to process what was happening. Was this real? Or was he about to wake up in his small bedroom in Ashford, Georgia, and discover this had all been a dreamed rector. Ashford took a breath. Mr. Brooks, the decision about scholarships isn't typically made immediately. We usually deliberate for several days after auditions conclude. However, he glanced at the other judges, who nodded in this case. I think we can make an exception. He extended his hand toward Elijah. On behalf of Harrington Music Conservatory, I would like to offer you a full scholarship, tuition, room, board, and a stipend for living expenses. If you choose to accept, you would join us for the fall semester. Elijah stared at the extended hand, not quite comprehending. A full scholarship. Everything covered. The thing that had seemed so impossible, so far beyond reach, was being offered to him right now. His voice cracked. He tried again. I accept. Yes. Thank you. Words failed him entirely. He shook Ashford's hand, then Professor Chen's, then went down the line, shaking hands with each judge. They were all smiling now, genuine smiles, congratulating him. There is one condition, Ashford said, and Elijah's heart sank slightly. Of course, there was a catch. You must agree to perform at our opening concert in the fall. We showcase our new scholarship students, and after what we just heard, I think the audience would be deeply disappointed if you weren't featured. It wasn't a real condition, Elijah realized. It was an honor. They wanted him to perform. They wanted to showcase him. I'd be honored, he managed to say. From the audience, Grandma Dot had made her way down to the judges' table. She was crying again, but these were tears of pure joy. Professor Chen saw her approaching and smiled. You must be Mrs. Brooks, Chen said. Your grandson is extraordinary. You should be very proud. I am Grandma Dot, said her voice shaking. Lord knows I am. She reached Elijah and pulled him into a tight embrace. You did it, baby, she whispered in his ear. You did it. Elijah hugged her back, and for a moment, he was that 5-year-old boy again, finding safety in his grandmother's arms. But he was also 17, standing on the edge of a future that had suddenly opened up before him, vast and full of possibility. The next few minutes were a blur. Other students who had auditioned came forward to congratulate Elijah, many of them genuine in their praise, despite their earlier skepticism. The girl who had giggled at him was one of them, and she looked genuinely ashamed as she approached. That was incredible, she said quietly. I'm sorry for earlier. I was an idiot. Elijah nodded, accepting the apology. He understood. They'd all been taught that certain people belonged in certain places, that the world had an order to it. Seeing that order challenged was uncomfortable, disorienting, but maybe also necessary. Mr. Patterson appeared, having driven separately from Ashford, and arrived in time to hear most of the performance. He was grinning ear to ear, pumping Elijah's hand enthusiastically. I knew it, he kept saying. I knew you could do it. Thank you, Elijah said, for believing in me, for the recommendation letter, for everything. You did all the hard work, Patterson said. I just pointed you in the right direction. Director Ashford approached Elijah once more, this time without the other judges as buffer. He looked older, somehow less imperious. Mr. Brooks, I hope you understand that my earlier comments were not representative of Harrington's values or my own better judgment. I let prejudice cloud my assessment, and that's inexcusable for someone in my position. Elijah looked at him for a long moment. He could be gracious here, could accept the apology without comment, or he could be honest. Director Ashford, he said slowly, I appreciate the apology, but I need you to understand something. What you said to me up there, those things about my disability, my background suggesting I was wasting everyone's time, those are things I've heard my whole life. From teachers, from other students, from people who look at me and see only what I can't do, never what I can. Ashford was listening. Really listening, his face serious. When you talk like that, Elijah continued, you're not just being mean to one person. You're reinforcing all the barriers that keep people like me from even trying. How many other kids like me heard what you said and decided not to audition next year? How many gave up before they even started because someone in authority told them they didn't belong? There was steel in Elijah's voice now, the steel he'd inherited from Grandma Dot, the strength forged through years of struggle. So yeah, I accept your apology, but I hope you'll think about how your words affect people. And I hope you'll remember this the next time someone shows up who doesn't look like what you expect a musician to look like. Ashford nodded slowly. You're right. And I will. I promise you that. He paused, then added, thank you for the lesson. I clearly needed it. As the sun began to set outside, casting golden light through the auditorium's high windows, Elijah and Grandma Dot prepared to leave. They had to catch the evening bus back to Ashford, back to their small house, and their regular lives, though those lives would never quite be the same again. Before they left, Elijah walked back onto the stage one more time. The auditorium was mostly empty now, just a few staff members cleaning up. He approached the piano, that beautiful Steinway that had been the vehicle for his triumph. He sat down at the bench and played a few gentle chords, not a performance, just a thank you to the instrument, to the music, to whatever force in the universe had allowed this day to happen. Grandma Dot watched from the audience, and in her mind she saw her daughter Angela, saw her standing beside the piano, with her hand on young Elijah's shoulder, smiling with pride. Whether it was memory or imagination or something more didn't matter. The feeling was real. As they walked out of Harrington Music Conservatory, out into the cooling evening air of Atlanta, Elijah realized something had shifted in him. Not just the external circumstances of his life, though those had certainly changed, but something internal, something fundamental. He'd spent his whole life apologizing for what he was, for the ways he didn't fit, for his disabilities and his poverty and all the things that made him different. He'd spent years making himself small, trying not to take up too much space, trying not to ask for too much. But on that stage, playing that piano, he'd claimed his space. He'd refused to be small. He'd shown the world exactly who he was in all his complicated, talented, struggling, triumphant reality. And the world had responded not with rejection, but with a standing ovation. "Grandma," he said as they walked toward the bus stop. "Do you think Mama would have been proud?" Grandma Dot stopped walking and turned to face him, placing both hands on his shoulders. "Baby, your Mama is proud. Wherever she is, whatever comes after this life, she's proud. I know it, like I know my own name." She pulled him close. "And I'll tell you something else. This is just the beginning. You're going to do great things, Elijah Brooks. You're going to touch people's hearts with your music. You're going to inspire other kids who think they can't because of where they come from or what challenges they face. You're going to make a difference." As they boarded the bus back home, as Atlanta's skyline disappeared behind them and the familiar rural landscape of Georgia appeared, Elijah allowed himself to dream. Not the small, careful dreams he'd had before, the ones that were careful not to hope for too much, but big dreams, impossible dreams. Dreams of concert halls and recordings and a life spent making music that mattered. Because he'd learned something today. He'd learned that the gatekeepers don't always know what they're talking about. He'd learned that talent and passion and determination could overcome barriers that seemed insurmountable. He'd learned that sometimes, just sometimes, the underdog wins. But most importantly, he'd learned that there are moments in life when a single sound can shatter years of doubt, when one note struck with trembling hands can silence an entire room and force everyone present to confront their own prejudices. And he'd learned that those moments are worth fighting for.